So today we'll be looking at ActiveRecord. ActiveRecord is a library that we discussed yesterday, remember? So yesterday we did a lot of work, and then towards the end we said everything we've done we could do better because there's a library that's already doing all of that for us, right? So that's ActiveRecord. Hopefully you've looked at a couple of the early labs and you have some idea of what it is, but if not, today we'll explore that together. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up my project. So this is the name of the bash file I created. And I made it global. So I can go anywhere in my computer and I can run this script and it will create a project for me. But first I need to go to where I want to create the script. So I'm going to go to the place where your cohort is. And if you look at this, this is my repo where all of my code lives. You know the code I share with you after the lecture? It goes here. So this is where I want to create my new project. My new project is going to be 08 Intro to ActiveRecord. So I will say ActiveRecord SH. So this is my script, the one that I wrote. And now I can give this the folder a name. 08 Intro to AR. It's not augmented reality. And finally, it's even cooler, you can even add the models you want to have. So remember, like we were working with artists and tracks, for example, or like dentists and appointments and customers, right? So you can just type here a couple of models that you would like to have. So in this case, I want to start it with, I want to keep it similar to what we were doing last time. So I'm going to stick to artist, and let's have track. So what kind of relationship do you think there will be between these two things? I want to keep it simpler. Yeah, so I'm like getting albums out of the way for now. So forget about albums. I don't want to have a many-to-many. I just want to have a one-to-many, right? So to keep the model very simple, I'm going to have an artist has many tracks, and a track belongs to an artist. Yes? So let's start with that. And when I run that, it will basically create a couple of files for me, do the bundle, so install all the libraries you need to install. And if I check my folders now, I now have a new folder. So now what I can do is Atom, the name of the folder, and when I run that, Atom will open the folder for me, which is pretty cool. So now I have the folder, and let me give you a quick tour of what this looks like and what it does. So first thing you notice is there's some files here. So we have some structure, right? We have an app folder, a config folder, a DB folder, and then just some files. First thing I'll show you is the gem file. Have you seen this before? Yes. Probably seen it, especially when going through the labs. You saw this kind of files. What do you think this file is about? Yeah, so everything you said. You're all right. You get a taco. So that's exactly it. So it turns out we need to specify somewhere, because you know that when you're working with Pry, for example, you install like gem install Pry, and now you can use Pry in any project. But what if you share this code with someone else, right? What if you put this code on GitHub and then someone downloads it and they try to run it and then they get an error because they never installed Pry, right? It turns out Pry is a library that you're using, and when you're using a library in your code, it's called a dependency, right? Your code depends on this library to run. If this library is not there, you're going to get an error because you're going to try to look for it, won't find it. Does that make sense? So this is called a dependency file, right? So the gem file, what it does is it lists every gem that I will be using for this particular project. So what that gives me is I can now run bundle, and bundle is a clever tool that we can use, and it will install all of this for us. And I can also just put this on GitHub, give it to someone else, and if they have bundle, all they have to do is just run bundle, and it will install all the dependencies for them. Because the alternative is they would need to go and type manually gem install SQLite, gem install Pry. That's why, right? So this makes it much, much easier. This basically describes every library that our project needs in order to work. So I'm saying I'm going to be using all of this in my project.
So the bundle installed and just go through the whole
Mhm.
directory. And
Goes through there. Yeah.
So even if the gem files put something else, it will still be bundled.
So the gem file has to be called gem file, because bundle is a library that will look for the specific file, and it will run through it.
And it's looking for it in Ruby gem, and you can set other libraries as well, because there are other places you can grab your gem from.
Yeah. So I'm saying I'm currently trying to get my libraries from this source. This is the website, because if you think about it, every time you're doing gem install, you're really getting libraries from the internet, right? So they're not coming from magic land. Somebody stored them. You can think that somebody has a repo somewhere with millions of libraries, right? And what you're doing when you're doing gem install ActiveRecord is you're pinging this server, checking if they have an ActiveRecord library, and then you download it from them. So this is what's happening for you behind the scenes, right? So what we're saying is, try to get all these gems. This is where I want you to get them from. That's the source.
Nico, the reason that sometimes you're going to put a version is because dependency might relate to Ruby version.
Exactly. So I'm using ActiveRecord. In ActiveRecord, the latest version, it's only happy to work with this other SQLite version. So when you're using different libraries, sometimes you need to make sure they work well together, because one library might depend on another library. And if you don't specify which versions to use, then it's chaos. Right?
My question is without
Without that, it will get the latest version.
without the benefit of a README, though, does the app itself know what version of Ruby it was built in? Like, how would you determine it?
There is also a way to specify which version of Ruby you're using. Yes. You will see that later on in your projects. And finally, once I run bundle, I actually get this file automatically generated for me. So I had to manually write this file, because here's where I specify what I want to use. But then this file gets generated for me once I've installed my libraries. What do you think? Why do you think this is important? Yeah, and this is the reason it's called gemfile.lock. It's literally locking all my dependencies. It's saying when you install them with this specific versions. So these are the same versions we need to use. Because if I give this to a different user now, and this different user is using different versions, well, how do you know that it's going to work the same way that it's working for you? Right? So you want to make sure that your code works the same on every machine. And this is what this gives you, right? It locks all the versions that you install. It's saying, hey, you had this dependency. When I installed it, we installed this version. So we know it's working, and it's working with this version. So you have to use the same version. Right? So this is way more specific than the other one. So that's the gem file. Any questions on the gem file before we move on? Should be fairly self-explanatory, right? So now we have a gem file. We list everything we need. When we run the bundle, we install everything, and we create this file to say, these are the versions we're using for each library.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you generated this folder from your script.
Yeah.
However, you also mentioned that you wrote the gem file manually.
Everything here you see so far has been written manually by me, except for this one, because what I did was I wrote this file in the script, and then I basically just ran bundle, and then bundle generated this other file. I will share it with you after the lecture. You can take a look at it, but now let's continue with the rest. There's this important stuff to learn. More than this. Has anyone ever worked with C before? I know it's a tough question, but okay, a couple of you. Have you ever heard of a make file? Okay, so in C and in Bash and in many tools, there's this file called a make file. Basically what it does is you can list some tasks that you want to perform. So imagine that I want to be able to deploy my app, or start running my app, or do something. So these are called like make commands. So basically, a make file is a little file like this one, where we can specify some tasks that we want to run. The benefit of this is, in the future, if we want to run one of these tasks, we don't need to type all the code manually anymore. We just say make run, and it will run the project. Make deploy, and it will deploy the project. So it's automating all the cool stuff that we're trying to do. So in the future, instead of having to type 10 lines of code when I want to deploy my project, I'll literally just type make deploy, and it works. Make run, my app starts running. Right? So that's beautiful. This is called a task runner.
What's the advantage of it over building your own module that just includes or extends the classes?
No, but it's not about classes. This is about actually running your project. So how you still need to run your project somehow, right? You need to run Ruby, you need to run a console, you need to set up some things.
Oh, I see.
This is not about running your Ruby code. This is how you get started with your Ruby code. Yeah, before. So this is more about your system, right? How do you push this to GitHub, for example, right? That's not going to happen in Ruby. That's going to happen somewhere else. So you could have all these tasks, like push to GitHub. You could create a task for it. So you don't need to do like add, commit, and stuff. You can literally try to like do that yourself. Or in this case, that's a make file. In this case, we have an equivalent in Ruby, and they call it a rake file because it's Ruby make file, rake file. That's a bit of a bad joke for them, but I didn't do it. It's literally what it's called. So it's called the rake file, and inside it works very similarly. So we have some tasks that we want to perform in Ruby, and you will see how this becomes really powerful in a minute. But there are some common things that we want to keep doing, like running our console with some libraries loaded, right? Running bundle, running a lot of things. And the rake file specifies all the tasks that we have access to. So what's happening now is we're requiring a couple of things. This is in order for us to have access to some special tasks. So you see this library here, ActiveRecord rake. This is a library. I didn't write this, but this will give me actually about like 20 tasks that someone else wrote for me already. And this is a task that I wrote manually myself. Right? So I wrote a console task, and this is the description. And this is how it works. If I'm in my terminal now, inside my project, I can run rake. Rake is the library that we installed. And I can run rake with a dash capital T. Or not, because I forgot to cd into my folder. So be in the right folder. And when I run it now, I see a list of all my available tasks. Right? So you don't have to memorize them all. There's a couple that you will remember by heart because you will use them very, very often from now on in your projects. But look, you can see it. Console, this is the one we wrote manually. And all of these ones came from that library that I showed you before. So today we're going to be looking at ActiveRecord, right? So these are a lot of tasks that will help us manage databases, manage ActiveRecord for us.
There's something to stick off in your head that you've done.
It's just, all you have to remember is, at the very least, that command. If you know that command, you can always just check what's available to you. Right? So, happy with this so far? Look, I can create a new one, and I can show you how easy this is. So I can just say, describe my file, and say like, say hi. And I can say task, greet, do, and now I can write my code here. And I can say put yeah. What do you think is going to happen when I run my rake T now? When I list all my tasks? I wrote it, and now I can run it. I can say rake greet, and I run that task. Right, so it's very easy to get started with this. And if I do rake console, this is the other task that I wrote before. It basically puts me in Pry, and I have access, because if you look at my rake file, I'm actually requiring this other file. This gives me access to all the, if I call it properly, gives me access to all the files that I created, all the other stuff. So this is basically a very easy way to debug your application, to test it. So every time you want to test your file from now on, every time you want to test your project, the way to do it is rake console. That will load all the files, so you don't need to require them anywhere else. And now we're in Pry, and we can start testing things. Let's test my artist. Let's test my track. It's there, right? Does that make sense? So we're going to keep working with that, but just remember that from now on, instead of just putting pry, we'll just do rake console, and it will load the project for us, and it will pry for us, and then we can just start testing things. So this is the way to debug your project from now on. It's just prying, but with some, like on steroids, with some extra stuff in there. Don't do steroids, by the way.
Nico, obviously, I we put it in specific places and such. So how is this?
So
Different? What is it?
this is prying here for us in a slightly different way. It doesn't matter. It's just pry start. It's doing the same thing. What's special is that we are also requiring this config environment file. So every time we run rake, we're actually running this. And every time we run this, this is the file that we're running. Right? So that's the next step. So we have a config folder with an environment file. This is basically requiring my bundle. Doing bundle require, which means load all the libraries that you want to use. So we now should have access to SQLite 3, pry, ActiveRecord, and all the stuff we listed in the gem file, remember? It's now available for us to use.
So we're trying after all.
Exactly. And then we're doing that. We're creating our connection to the database, similar to what we were doing last time, remember? So we're creating it, and we're saying we're using SQLite 3. Right? So this is different because we're not using SQLite 3 directly anymore. Now we have a second library managing SQLite for us. So we're saying we're using ActiveRecord, and ActiveRecord is going to use SQLite 3 to do the work for us. So we need to specify it here. And finally, I need to specify, okay, where's my actual file? Where do I connect to? I'm going to change this to DB. But it's the same. I just don't want to confuse you because we've been looking at DB so far. This is just a different extension for a database.
So just to finalize that first, so if I wanted to try having created a bunch of artists, I could write that.
You don't need to write that. Just rake console. Don't overcomplicate it. Just rake console. All of this will run for you. You don't need to worry about this anymore. This is just, you set it up once, you forget about it. And you don't even need to set it up once because I will give you a script to do this bit as well. So I really want you to focus on your app, not everything that's around it. Really understand your app. Be able to debug it, right? And then we're doing this require all, which is another library we got. So require all app is basically saying, go find this folder app and look at all the files that are in this folder and require them all. So if I create a new file now here, it's also going to be required. I don't need to be creating new lines to require every single file. I just say require all app. So from now on, every time this file runs, we're doing a couple of things. We are getting bundle, making sure we load all the libraries we're trying to use. Like we're requiring pry, we're requiring ActiveRecord, we're requiring SQLite 3, we're requiring all of the stuff in the gem file. We are connecting to our database. We are requiring everything that's in this folder, and then we run pry. Right? So you see what I mean when I say it's on steroids? It's doing a lot of things for us, and then it's prying. But what all you should care about is, from now on, anytime you want to pry, you just need to do rake console. And it will start your project, it will load all your files, and then it will pry. And then you can start testing.
Nico, can I ask you, where's the require all, where's that code actually written? Which one of the gems is it from? Oh, it's not,
It's an actual gem called require all. Yeah. No magic. I mean a bit of magic. But we happy? Lastly, I have a little database file, which is just another configuration file saying what's the name of our database, right? I'm going to change this to DB as well to make it match. What are we using SQLite? What's the encoding? So this is stuff you shouldn't worry about. This is just standard configuration file. You can always Google it and copy paste it. It's fine. You don't need to worry about this. This is basically setting up my project. But I don't want to spend a day setting up my project. I want to spend a day working on my actual app, right? So we have all the configuration ready. Finally, we have a DB folder that's currently empty, but some stuff will go in there. What do you think will go in there? So the obvious thing is the database, So far, we don't have a database, right? So when you are sharing your code with someone else, for example, well, they will get an empty folder with no database. But they have enough, because we have all this configuration file and all that stuff, they can just run a command and they can create the database locally for them. Because you don't want to be sharing databases, right? I don't want to get my info and share it with someone else. What if you have like important passwords and stuff in there? It's not a great thing to do. So when you post this to GitHub, you ignore the database. You're not posting the database. You just post the code. And each user that downloads it can then create their own local database and start playing with it, if it makes sense. So right now, there is no database. So what's the first thing you think I should do? Create a database. And how do you think I'm going to do it? Rake. So if you're not sure, I know that I will be running rake commands for everything, because I don't want to be typing things manually. I don't want to write code manually. I have someone who did it for us. Remember, libraries are great. People smarter than you and me have created this code so we can enjoy it and focus on what really matters to us. Right? So if I check, it looks like this one is the one I'm after.
What's the difference between that and Sapphire?
So this also loads the schema and does some other stuff. I don't know what that is. I think this does creating and more. But for now, I just want to create it. So rake db create. I run it. And look, it magically knew that what I wanted to create was the name of this folder. Remember, I just changed the file and everything. Why does it know? Well, because it's looking at that configuration file. It's looking at here. And it's saying, okay, this is the name I will give to your database. And it's going to go in this folder. So now, we have a file. Completely empty. So although we have a table, there's absolutely nothing in there. So what's the next thing we need to do? So remember, we're going to be working with artists and tracks. So the script I gave you already created these two things. Remember, I showed you yesterday that inheriting from the base class is just basically giving us all these cool commands like destroy, find, create, and all that stuff. And that's great. But we're missing a piece of the puzzle now. Because a model, right, consists of two different things. It's a class, it's to represent it in Ruby, and then we need the other part. What's the other part? We need the table to connect to. If there is no table, where are we getting the artist from? We don't have one, right? So every time you have a model means to have a Ruby class, and it's basically linked to a DB table, right? So that means we're going to have the artist class connected to the artist table, right? They talk to each other. That's what we call a model, right? We have the class that represents our data, and we have the table that stores our data, and they basically work with each other, right? So the database stores all the data, and it persists the data, and the model can now, the class can now work with that information. It can get it, go and get it. Yeah? So we have this, but we don't have this so far. So if I try to run my rake console now, and pry, I have an artist, and it looks like it's working, but if I try to say artist.all, it's not quite working yet. It's not giving me anything, because it's not finding my table. If I try to do first, no such table, artist. So you see, it's trying to work its magic, and it's trying to find that artist table, but it's not there. So it's failing. Right? So it is actually running SQL for us already. You can see it from artist, order by. So it's doing some SQL. So we don't need to write the SQL anymore, but we do need to manage our database, right? Because although it's very smart, it still doesn't know what we want to put in an artist. Do we want just the name? Do we want the name and a title? Do we want the name and something else, like full name, last name, address? It doesn't know. So we need to build that. Now, here it gets a bit more interesting. So we don't really need to deal with SQL, and we don't really need to build our objects with like all the methods and class methods and stuff. So that's really easy. What we do need to do is manage our database. And to manage our database, ActiveRecord gives us a very cool concept called migrations. Right? And migrations are basically the equivalent of commits, of Git. Imagine it's Git for your database. Right? So what I mean is, you want to make some changes to your database. You can say, okay, I want to make these changes. And now you can save them in a little like commit. And now you're basically saving the state of your database at this point in time. And if later on you want to make more changes, well, you create another commit. And now you have 2. And then you create another one, and you have 3. And if at any time you mess it up, or you want to go back, or something happens, you can roll back. And you can go to the previous state of your database. So you're now saving, every time you make a change to your database, you're saving it in a file that describes. So we're basically going to have files that describe what our database should look like at any one time. Right? So the changes we're making to it. So let's dive into it. So the way to do that is to take a look at our rake first, because we're going to be using rake for everything. What do you think we should be using? Create migration. Well done. So, and it's even telling me something, right? It says it has some parameters, so it has name and version. Name is required. Version is not. So it works like this: rake db create migration, and then I need to give it a name equals and the name. So the name of this should be basically describing what you're trying to do, right? So imagine you're writing commit messages, and you have to write the commit of, okay, what am I doing in this commit? Well, what am I doing in this migration? How am I changing my database? Well, I'm going to create artist. I do that. We now have a new folder in DB that's been created for us, and we have this. Look, create artist. What do you think this is? Yeah, more specifically, a timestamp. So it's to the second, or millisecond. Is it second or millisecond? So we have year, month, date. Yeah, just to the second. Good enough. And if I check it, it created this file for us, right? So it has some migrations. It has a template. It doesn't know what we want to do, but at least it gave us a template that we can start writing from. So it's saying, create artist. It's a migration. And migrations in ActiveRecord are just objects that describe what the migration should be doing. And it's saying, I'm going to inherit from ActiveRecord migration. So it's getting some special methods again. You know, like the models get some special methods to destroy and stuff. Well, we have a special method to like change our database now. Right? So we have access to some magic. And in here, what is it we're trying to do? What change are we making to the database? We're creating a table. So create table is something we actually have access to. It gave us this method. Just like when you inherit from base, you get access to destroy and find. Well, when we inherit from ActiveRecord migration, we get access to change table, remove, like drop table, all that stuff. So in this particular case, what I'm trying to do is create a table. And the syntax for this is create table. We need a symbol now with the name of the table. So I'm going to create artist. And then we need a block. And the block is going to take a parameter. And the parameter is the table. So it's basically saying create a table artist. And now basically loop through the table or run some code with my table. So you can, now we need to specify, okay, what is it we're doing with this table? We're not just creating it. We also need to define what the columns need to be. Right, so table has a couple of extra methods that we can use. And we can now say string, for example. Right, so I'm creating a string column. I'm creating the column that's going to be text. And we give it the name. So all I'm saying is create a table called artist. and create a column called name, and it's going to be text, a string.
Is it making ID by default?
Yeah. So it will make IDs for us. It will make auto increment and all that stuff. We don't need to worry about it.
This syntax is basically SQL like this.
Exactly. So you could literally translate this into SQL, right? You could literally see the SQL, what you're doing. You're doing create table, artist, right? And then you're saying, it's doing the ID for us, so we don't need to worry about it. So we just do the next one, name, text. Something like this.
What was the other active record that you were using that was the migration?
Which one? This one.
So the active record base is more like
Active record base is for the model.
like instance methods, and this one would be like class methods.
No, so these are model methods, right? So all the methods we need to query the database. And this gives us methods that we need to create things in the database, to change the database.
We could obviously execute create table just using base, but this is giving this additional functionality in that it's, as you say, kind of acting more like a version control.
Well, what are we creating? We cannot do create with the model, right?
We did do that. But yesterday in your lesson, we basically
But-
executed a create table.
But we had to do it in pure SQL.
Yeah, we had to do pure SQL.
So this is basically now doing the same with Ruby.
Yeah, I suppose my challenge to this is like I really like the version control because that seems super powerful to me that you can roll back.
Mhm.
But the annoyance is that you
need to learn your syntax.
Value for the syntax.
Sure, but from now on, you basically will almost never touch SQL anymore. So this is worth learning.
Yeah.
The good thing about this is not just a command that I run once and I forget about. Now this file will be stored, and this is saying at this point in time, right? So
That's very cool.
on the 22nd of March of 2019, at this second, you made these changes to your database, right? So you're describing what your changes are. And this is what will allow you to go back and forward. So we're not just making a change, we're creating a migration. And this is what matters, right? This is the difference. We're not just making a change, we are keeping a file, we're keeping a record of that change. So we can later undo it or redo it very easily. So this is very powerful. Again, imagine it's Git for your database. And it also is doing some other magic for us, right? So it's creating the ID for us, so we don't need to worry about it. So it has a lot of really good practices baked into it. And it has something else that's very cool as well. It has extra methods that we could use. So in this case, this is one we'll be using over and over. This is going to create, it doesn't say it, but it's creating a couple of new columns for us. It's going to create a created at column and updated at column. So every artist that we ever create from now on, it will be automatically be given the time where we created it and the time when we last changed it. Right? So there is a lot of power in this.
And then what is just
You'll see it. So databases actually have a date time type of value. It is basically numbers behind the scenes, but we happy? So now, does our database have this artist table?
You have to call them right now.
I have to run this code, right? Until I run this code, my database has nothing. If I check my database now, empty, nothing in it. So what I've just done is I didn't actually change anything yet. I described what my change should be, right? That's the migration. It's the description of what your change should be. So I'm saying when my database changes, I'm going to create a table and add artist, blah, blah, blah. But this hasn't happened yet. So now I need to make it happen. To make it happen, what do you think I could use? Migrate. So create migration to create the file, and then migrate to run that file. So I'm going to do rake db migrate. And I don't need to tell it which file to run. Because every time I run migrate, what it's going to do is it's going to check this folder for me, and it's going to check, okay, which files we haven't run yet. And it's going to run those. So it's basically saying, it's going to know where it is right now, and then it's going to apply all the changes that we haven't applied yet. So it's very smart. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. But if we do db migrate, you can see that it ran. It tells you how long it took. And there's something new here. It created a schema for us, right? So the schema, what is the schema? Okay. The structure of the schema for the table is the structure for the table, but this goes even further. This is describing the whole database, right? So this is describing that particular table. But if I had multiple tables, I would have many of these here. So this is literally describing my entire database. And what that means is, if I now share this code with someone else and they know my schema, they can just run a command, and with pressing enter, they can recreate a database that looks exactly like mine. Right? So the schema is the representation of the database right now. This is what your database looks like now. The migration is, this is the changes that I'm making at every step. So the migration doesn't have all of the information. We now know that this migration, we know what the database is going to look like right now, because we only have one migration. But imagine if you have 100 of them. The 100th migration is just going to be like, add column to this. So the migration itself is just describing that you want to add a column to a specific table. But when you run that code, you check your schema again, the schema is going to have like all the tables you've ever created with all the columns you've ever created. So the schema is your source of truth in this case. And the migration is just describing the changes you want to make. It's more granular.
So, like the times you were doing, you had separate files, the create file and build file, SQL. It's like having them both in one.
Create file and build file. Which one?
Yeah, build.sql and create.sql for the text editors.
Yeah.
So it's like
It's basically, yeah. Yeah, and we can check it out. I can go now into my students and intro to AR. So this is all, we created everything from scratch here, remember? With my little cool script. We have access to the files. We have access to the DB. And now look, it created artist. It also happens to have created 3 extra tables. These are tables that ActiveRecord uses to do magic behind the scenes, to manage some stuff for us. So we never need to worry about those. We just need to worry about the one that we created. And if I look at it, it did all of this for us. So it created a table called artist, it gave it an ID, it gave it some cool stuff to ID, so it's integer, it cannot be null, so it can never be empty. Right? It will increment as a primary key. It gave it a name. Name is a varchar. So varchar is basically a kind of text, and you can specify how long you want the maximum to be. If I say like varchar 20, that means this is a text field that cannot be over 20 characters. Something. So the database can make assumptions and make everything more efficient. Because databases really like to be specific, and the more specific you are, the more assumptions you can make, and the more efficient that your code can run behind the scenes.
So it prefers bar chart because at the moment it's exactly like text. So wanted the limits of 50, and then you just update it and go, now it's 50, and I'll cut everything.
Yeah. And then it created, remember I told you that when we do the timestamps, it created these 2 things for us automatically. So the type of this is date time, so it's literally a date type of thing. Created that and updated that. And if I check browse data, artist, well right now we have no artist, but we do have a table.
So if you now try to input a new column into the artist, you're going to do it through SQL line. Will it also keep track of the time it will be created?
No, you never touch SQL directly anymore. Right? So the power with the migrations comes that everything you do, every change you make, you need to describe it in the migration. Otherwise, how does the migration know? So you get a lot of power, but the responsibility is you need to do it in the same way. Because if you update the database here and here and here, you don't have a source of truth now. So our source of truth for changing databases is through migrations. Yeah, if you do it the other way, you will really mess it up. So don't do it. Because now ActiveRecord doesn't know that there's a new column in there, because it didn't create it, so it doesn't know it exists. Or it needs to query it. It'll basically have a hard time. You'll get bugs everywhere.
Not for this lecture necessarily, but is there a way to lock it to a handshake from migrate so that there's that
It's a good question. I don't know, but I'm sure the documentation can give you more info about that. But be disciplined and do it the right way. So whenever you create a migration, you can, because you could also even create these files manually. And some of the labs will tell you to do that, but I strongly recommend you don't. I recommend that every time you want to create a migration, you do it like this.
Just talk about this, the ActiveRecord migration is inheriting from what's the
That's the version.
version number?
Yeah. Sometimes you get errors if you don't specify the version. And that's, again, happens when you create the files manually. So
how do I find which number I should use?
well, you need to find out which version of ActiveRecord you're using and use that. So maybe here. Remember the gem file? But just let the machine do it for you. Create a migration through rake. Rake, create migration. DB, create migration. I don't want to care about that. I know, but it's a cognitive load, that something extra you need to think of that a machine could be doing for you. Great. Happy so far? So now that we created this, I can now check if my artists are working. I can now see if my artist model is finally properly set up. Everything's working. How do I do that? I need to get into my console. How do I get to my console? Rake console. Right? Again, this ran all my files, so it imported even my artist. And now I should be able to say artist.all. And you can see now it's giving me different output. This is now saying, hey, I found it. It's just empty. If I say first, it's not giving me an error. It's just saying there is no first. It's empty. So how do I create a new artist? Artist.create. Remember? So I could do artist.new and then artist.save. Or I could just do create and it will do both for me at the same time. So it's exactly the same as what we wrote last time. So in this case, I don't want to have to save it. I just want to, I want to do both things, like new and save at the same time. So I'm just going to say create. I need to tell it the name, and that's going to be my name. And look, it's giving me back me. It's even telling me when I created it, when I updated it. So initially, these two things are the same, right? But then later on, maybe if I make a change to it, the created at will stay the same always, and the update will change. It's telling me I have an ID of 1. Is that a question, or are you stretching?
So, is this automatically updated the artist model so that it has
So
attributes that match?
yes and no. So we obviously don't change this at all yet. But the artist model is inheriting from this, and this is doing some dynamic programming behind the scenes. So when we query it, it's actually checking the table, checking which columns we have, and working its magic dynamically for us. So basically, the table is the source of truth. If we add stuff to the table, this is going to know. Because this is checking every time. Okay, what columns do I have access to? Right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's also checking the schema. So it knows here, right? It knows from here that I have access to name, datetime, datetime. So it's actually checking in this and saying,
So that is how the artist model is keeping track of the changes that you're making to the table by
that's our source of truth now. So we now have a description of what the database looks like. So the artist model can come check this file and say, okay, I have access to name and these things.
So presumably, because it dynamically updates it's the methods you can do find by, create with that as well if you want.
I can do find, and find is actually finding by ID. And I can do find by name. And it works. So it created all of that for us.
And we should be able to do find by
Anything.
created app.
Should be. But the problem with this is, I think the way this is stored in the database is different from this. So it's probably not going to find it now. So there is no created app. Find or create by, no. Is it created? Oh, created. Oh yeah, it's working. But I don't know what to put in here. So yeah, it does work. Thanks for the typo correction. But the thing is, if you look at created ads, I'm not sure how to find it right now. So maybe I need to put like a string like 2019, like that, the other timestamp. But the answer is, yes, you can do it. I don't know the format in which you can query it. If you look at the documentation, I'm sure you can find it. So if I were you and I wanted to do it, I would say Ruby active record find by created at, or something like this. Okay, so this is something else. This is another way of doing it, but it's not the way I want. But again, I'm sure you will find it by digging through the resources. So yes, it can be done. Exactly how? I don't know, because I generally don't do it. Yeah.
So if we created two columns with name and something else, would it create a date stamp for each one of the name and the other variable? So you can tell you each time you update one individually, is it just for the whole after row?
I didn't get the question exactly. Can you rephrase that somewhat? So if you're creating multiple things?
Multiple, yeah.
Yeah.
Multiple attributes, does it create a timestamp pair for each?
No, it's a time. No, yeah, okay, I got it now. Yeah, the timestamp is for the row. So anytime you make a change to the row, there's only one timestamp for each of those. Yeah, sorry. Great. That's working. We happy? Should we take a 5-minute break? So we're here at 41 past. So let's recap. I'm saying it again because now I'm recording it. Let's recap. So initially we had a gem file. This is where we describe our dependencies. We then need to run bundle on this, and that will create our lock file, which is where we specify more specifically every library that we installed in exactly which version. We have a rake file. So we created a couple of commands. The console is super useful, but then these ones are even more so, right? So this is just basically importing rake commands from a different library. So this line here is the line that gives us the db create, db migrate, db create migration, and all that stuff. And we're also requiring an environment file. So the environment file is literally requiring bundle, running bundle. So it's actually importing all the libraries we need to use. It's connecting to ActiveRecord. This one here, we didn't explain it, but all this is saying is creating a logger for ActiveRecord. So it's saying every time something happens in ActiveRecord, log it to the standard out. And standard out basically just means the terminal. Right? So it's saying every time something happens in ActiveRecord, like when you run some SQL and some stuff, put it on the terminal so that you can debug it. You can see what's happening. So it's really useful for debugging. So you see that when we run these things, for example, you know when we create this stuff, you can see the SQL running. That's because of this line. It's running, it's logging all of that stuff. And finally, we do require all app, which is basically requiring all the files that we ever create in this app folder. So that means that if I create a file now here, I don't need to require it manually. It's automatically being required because we're requiring the whole folder. Cool? So then we moved on to migrations. What are migrations?
Like GitHub for databases.
It's like Git for databases. In what way?
The way that you can make changes to
Yeah.
Make them like
Yeah. So you make changes to it, and then what happens?
describing each change.
You're-
Run the change.
Yeah, you're describing each change at every point. Then you run the change. What's that cool? Why is that important?
Because it gives us the ability to roll back in time if something goes wrong.
So at the beginning of time, I had no database. As time goes on, I create a database, then I add some tables to it, right? And I start doing stuff. So what migrations allow us to do is to go from that beginning of time, where we just have an empty database, to creating all the tables, adding all the columns, removing columns, changing names. So any change we ever make, we're describing in this migration. So if you think about it, and let's actually create one more. So for now, so far we have one migration, and all we're doing is creating an artist table. What's missing? We need the track, right? So to finish our model for tracks, we need to have a tracks table. So we have the track class. It's here, right? I wrote that for you with my awesome script. But then we don't actually have the table that it should link to. So now we're going to have to create that. I could have technically just written that here in this migration. So I could literally just say, create another table here. So migrations are not just one single thing at a time, right? It's literally any change that we want to make. So we could make multiple changes per migration. But I am choosing to not do this. So each migration is going to have create this table, then create this other table, right? To show you that we can have multiple migrations. So I'm going to, instead of having a single point in time in which I create both tables, I'm going to have 2 points in time. Create one table here, and then at a different time, create a different table here. So we can migrate between the two as well. We can move back and forth. So how do I create my artist table now? Rake, everything rake. DB, create migration, right? So everything's prefixed with DB, all the DB stuff. Migration, what's important? What do I need? I need a name. The version is kind of optional. The name is required. It needs to be capital, like this, otherwise it won't work. And here, what do I write? Here, I need to describe in English what I'm trying to do, right? So this is like my commit message. So I'm saying create tracks. And remember, the table is always lowercase and plural, so tracks. And the model is always title cased and singular. Right? So the track class is linked to the tracks table. The artist class is linked to the artists table. What?
I have to make up a name for my change. It feels like it's just useful.
I mean, when you write Ruby, right, you do everything with underscores anyway. But the problem with this is, in programming, I might be able to say create tracks, but using spaces in file naming is going to lead you to trouble, because different systems represent spaces differently. If you have a URL with spaces, it's going to change that to %20 or something like this. So spaces are basically to be avoided when you're doing file names. So this is more robust. Yep. So look, create artist. Now he created create tracks for us, and he gave us a timestamp as well. So it's really cool because we know exactly when we did this, and we know exactly when we did this, right? And we know which one came first, and we know which one came second, and third, and fourth. We can order them. It's basically in incremental numbers, right? So the bigger number is the latest change, the smaller number is the previous change, the earlier change. So now, yeah, I described that I want to make a change. I created my migration, but now I need to say what is the change I'm making. So the change I'm going to make is what? I'm creating another table. Yeah? And what next? You remember? The name as a symbol, right? So tracks, and then I'm going to start a block of code that has my table in there as a parameter. And now I can say, okay, what do I want from tracks? Maybe a title. I want timestamps. If I can get them for free, why not? Great. Let's say I forget. But yes. Do it. If you don't specify timestamps, you don't get timestamps. Great. So, do we have our tracks table now? You need to migrate. If I check my schema, is the tracks table there? No. So, if it's not here, it means it doesn't exist. Right? So, even though we described the change, we didn't affect the change. We didn't actually run the change. So, how do I run the change? Yeah? And how does it know that this change is already there and this one isn't? It must be keeping a log somewhere, and somewhere in plain sight. You could see it right there.
The version and the date of birth.
There you go. Does that look familiar? The version? What's in the version? Which one? It matches this, right? That's how it knows.
It keeps track of the last one.
It keeps track of the present of the database. So right now, you know when you have a map and you are here? Well, it's saying we are here. We are there. So to go to the future, we need to migrate. And then we could also go to the past, then we could go back to a previous point in time. So we're basically time travelers. If I run migrate now, look at my schema, see? Updated. Look at the version. It changes to match the latest file. So that's how it knows, right? So if you had to look at these two things, okay, where are we now? Okay, we are here. If I create 10 new files, well, we're still here. But when we migrate, we go to the end, right? So we're traveling in time, applying these changes. So this is a very powerful concept, right? It's literally like Git for your database. Cool.
Accidentally deletes the migrate folder.
Yeah. Don't do that. So, same as before, I can pry and I can say tracks or track. And now it works, it's just empty. So we can create a track. We need to give it a title, right? And if we don't, well, right now it still works. And the reason it works is because I didn't specify that my title was required. I'll leave that for you for homework to find out. Maybe look at the labs, read the docs, but it can be done. And it needs to be done somewhere here. Maybe like this. Maybe not. Should we try it? Nah, I won't. I want you to use your heads, not copy paste what I do. So that's not working now. Okay, so now we have a track that we don't really want. Why did I close my database here? No. No. That's not what I wanted. I wanted this, and this, and this, and that. So look, now we have tracks as well. And if I check my browse data, I can see tracks. And I can see that I have that one with no. I don't want it. Although I could be a very hipster artist and have just a song with no name. but I don't want to. So track first, it's finding it. Now we can say destroy, boom. Yeah, so we still have all the methods that we played around with yesterday. They're just magically there. So now I want to create another one. I need to give it a title, and I need to say, I don't know, whatever. Look, ID 2, remember? It will always just keep going up. So you're right. Ricky, can I call you Ricky?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. How do we know that these two things are related? We don't really, do we? There's no relationship right now. So what should the relationship be again? Tracks and artists. An artist has many tracks. A track belongs to an artist. So when it belongs to an artist, what does that mean? Remember, when we're creating classes, if it belongs to an artist, means we need to keep. Yeah. So if we're creating classes, before we were saving the instance, remember? And now we're dealing with databases, we need to have the ID of the artist it belongs to. So databases work with IDs because it's more efficient for them. Great. So we made a mistake. There's two ways to fix it. Who can find them? That is not the right way. There's two right ways to do it. Great. There's two ways to update using ActiveRecord.
One is to create a new migration.
Yep. Yeah. So we have two choices. We can either make another commit, another change to the database. That means let's create a new migration. Or we said, okay, we made a mistake. Let's roll back, change the file, migrate again. Let's go back in time, change the future, go back to the future. Back to the Future. Now I want to watch that film. So I'll show you both very quickly. We can say exit. So one, let's try creating a new migration. So to create a new migration, I'm going to say add artist ID to tracks. Yep. Creates that for us. So now we have a third point in time. Where are we now in time? We're here. How do we know? Well, if you're not sure, you can check that these two match. We are here. We want to go there. But first we need to say, what is this? This is just empty right now. So before we're doing create table, now what are we doing? Yeah, I think we can do change table. Can we? Or actually, there's another one. Add column. And now add column works in this way. Let's see if we remember. Name of the table, name of the column, type of the column. So maybe? Should we try it? How do we apply this change? So the change is still not here. You can see tracks doesn't have that. So we need to say Drake db migrate. Boom. I got it right. Right? So this is one way to do it. We changed the database. We created a new migration.
Yeah, what about if, let's saying hard code is what did actually happen.
Sorry?
Like in the previous migration, instead of adding a new migration, we just hard code the previous migration.
But again,
Rerun it.
yeah.
Like
So you need to roll back,
yeah.
then change the migration, and then migrate again.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to do now.
Change.
Yep.
Migrate back again.
Yeah. So now look, I'll show you what it means to roll back. So yep. So we can say rake db roll back. What do you think is going to happen? Where are we now in time? We're here, right? So what's going to happen? We go here. What does it mean to go there? What is it that we are undoing? We're just undoing this change, right? So if I check my schema, what do you think how should my schema change now? Ready? What happens if I roll back again? Where do we go to? Mm-hmm. So if you had data there, you would lose it. So that's why in some cases, going back in time is not the good choice. Because sometimes when you're going back in time, you're going to drop the table. And if you drop the table and you had lots of data in there, you're going to lose your data. You can back up your data and then put it back there. But sometimes the only right answer is, okay, we just need to add a column. So create a new migration, right?
If we have different points in time, can we actually go back to a specific one?
People keep asking me that, and the answer is probably, but I don't know how. I personally just roll back. Because generally when you want to roll back, you want to roll back to one or two before. So let's just run it twice. But there is, knowing ActiveRecord, it's very likely that that can be done. Maybe if we do help. Yeah, I don't know. It's not very clear in there. Yeah, so read the docs. There's probably a way. It's not really needed. You could just do it a couple of times. If you ever need it, you can read the docs. So the way of the programmer is this. The way to program is not to grab a book about programming and learn everything. It's as you need things, you should look them up, learn about them. I never needed this. I never really cared about it. I know this programming is powerful. I know ActiveRecord can probably do it. If one day I need it, I Google it. Right? So there's no need to cram my head with information that I'm not going to use. Great. So now where are we in time? Here, here, or here? Yeah. And if I roll back again, I'll show you though. Fear not. We're at time 0. We're back to the Big Bang before the Big Bang happened. Sorry? We can go forward, yeah. We can go forward at any time. So, yeah. So we haven't. I lost my track. So I've just lost Sunshine, and I've lost the Nicholas artist because I dropped those 2 tables, right? So I'm going to have to create those again. But I am at the beginning of time, and because we have the migrations, we don't need to say create the table again. We have the migrations. So what we need to do is now run them again. Right? That's the power of migrations. Yeah? Happy? We're at time 0. That means we are not even here. We're in limbo.
Is there a mechanism to back up the thing itself? Data.
So generally what you would do is you would create a seed file with some basic info that you want to have. And then you can also create backups for your database.
So just,
yeah.
There's no...
You can. You need to back up. In a production environment, you will back up daily so you don't lose the data. If someone hacks you or whatever. There is a way. We won't get into it.
Yeah.
Great. So why did I go back in time? So I forgot artist ID. That means, do I really need this change anymore? Not really. So I can go back, delete this future. I don't want that to happen. And alter this future. I want this to happen, but I just forgot to add artist. So, sorry, integer artist ID. Yes? Now let's go back to the future. How do we do that? Look, it ran this migration, and then it ran this other migration. It will automatically go to the present, basically. Again, maybe, I don't know. Is there a roll forward? Give me a paw. Play dead. Nah.
What's that? Does that specify steps with a rollback? You can specify steps. On the rollback, sorry.
Yeah, so it looks like you can specify which version you want to migrate to as well, right?
You can specify the version
And you can also specify in the rollback. So maybe we can specify like rollback 3 or whatever. But that's what I'm saying. Probably you can do it. I never had to do it because I usually just don't get in there. I keep the simple stuff. Remember what I told you about Git? If you're using Git properly, you usually just need to learn 10% of Git. When you mess it up, then you need to learn the other 90%. So I'm sticking to the 10% because I try not to mess it up. I recommend you do the same. We can go down rabbit holes, you know. We could spend like months just learning ActiveRecord, but what I really want to do is build an app. So I want to learn just enough ActiveRecord to do what I want. Knowing that if in the future I need it, I can always look it up. Knowledge is at your fingertips. Great, so now we have everything we want. Let's wrap this up. And let's wrap it up by doing some magic. So I'm going to go back here. Actually, I want to do something very interesting. I'm going to create a new file. Not in migrate, but in DB. And I'm going to call this a seed file. Or is it seed or seeds? I never remember. I think it's seeds. Basically, this is a file that Drake can run for you. So here, I can just create artist. And I can create tracks. So I can say create. Yeah? So I could say, you can actually create artists like this, one by one, like name. And I could do many artists like this. There's a shortcut. So you can actually pass an array instead. And inside you have hashes. And now every hash is basically an artist that you're creating. So you can say Nicholas. I don't know. Your name's like catchy, your fault. So, same thing with tracks. We can say title. And we can say artist ID 1. I don't know. important. Where? This one?
Yeah.
It should work anyway, I think. Yeah.
I just saw you thinking, how was you, what shortcut was you thinking when you copied and pasted, highlighted
So,
this product? I mean, you highlighted Friday,
yeah.
Highlighted the quotes. What shortcut did you put there?
So, this. I just double clicked.
Oh, you double clicked it.
Yeah, when you double click a word, it will highlight the word. And also when you do Command C on a line, any part of the line, without actually selecting anything, it will actually copy the whole line and then you can paste it many times. Then Command Z goes back, Command Shift Z goes forward. Sorry? Command Y also goes forward. Anyway, eyes here. My eyes are right here. Ready? So, okay, now we did that, we should be able to say rake db seed. And it breaks. Initialize constant tracks. We'll put yes. No, this is fine. It's just that I did have an extra S, but the extra S was here. You can see now it ran without any issues. And what that means is we have our tracks. Oops. We ran the first bit twice because the first bit didn't have an error, so we actually ran that twice. So now one thing we could do is rake db reset, I think. So rake db reset is going to do many things for us. Yeah. So it's basically going to drop the whole database, create it again, run all the migrations, run the seed file. So it's basically destroying the universe and recreating it again. And for some reason, what? Oh, I know why. I have an idea. So we can do drop artist, destroy all, I think. And tracks, destroy all. So when I run my seed file, now the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to get rid of all the artists and all the tracks. I know what's going on. This is a different file now. It actually worked the first time. But the problem was with SQLite browser. Because I actually deleted the file and created a new file.
So it hangs on to that instance of that one.
I'm expecting that to be the case, otherwise I'll be sad.
Such a great explanation.
You don't want your lead to cry, do you? Yeah. Debugging. Cool, but this is also useful because every time we seed now, we can first of all clear the database and then repopulate it with the artists, right? So we don't have to reset the whole database and drop the tables and drop everything. We just literally drop just the raws and recreate the raws.
Is this the right way to add data?
So this is the right way to add the initial data. That's why it's called seeding, right? You plant the seed. This is the beginning. Then you let it grow. I should have been an artist.
Your next lecture should be purely
It's a firewall. Sorry. I need a minute. All right. Happy? Cool. Now, what is the relationship between tracks and artists? One to many. One artist has many tracks. A track belongs to an artist. So, what if I told you that we also have that magic built in as well? So we have that relationship sort of done for us. Almost. So I should be able then to say artist, right? In fact, let me let me create more like more tracks for me. I'm going to run the seed again, which is going to destroy all my rows and then recreate them. By the way, you see the indices keep growing. It doesn't matter. See? Drake, console. Great. So I should be able to find Nicholas and then find Nicholas's tracks, right? Because there is a relationship. So to do that, I can do artist. Maybe find. I can find one. I know my ID in this case, so I can find by ID. Oh, of course. Burn. Well, so this is great, right? If we don't know the ID, we can say find by name. Or you can even say find by. And this is more versatile. You can now say name. And it will find it just by name. You can even look for multiple things. Something that has a name and maybe something else as well. Like you can look for like multiple columns at the same time. So find by name Nicholas. Now I don't need to know my ID. I can just find me. So I found me. I'm going to save me in a variable. So now I have access to myself. I'm not going to say I can play with my... I have access to my own variable. And we can do stuff with this, right? So I should be able to find my own tracks. So I should be able to say Nico tracks. Now, join them. No. Oh, but what's that, Moses? Yeah. Yeah, it's going to find the first one. If you have an array in Ruby and you say find, it's going to find the first instance that matches, right? Same with the database. It's going to find the first one, stop there. Because we're saying like basically find is like limit 1, right? So start looking, when you find the first match, that's it. Great. So something's not quite right. Right? So it turns out there is a relationship, but ActiveRecord doesn't really know about it yet. So it's smart, but not that smart. But it's actually not too far off. So what is the relationship between an artist and the tracks? An artist has many tracks. Has many tracks. And what is the relationship between a track and an artist? Belongs to artist. So let's try that again. I got Nico, and I got Nico tracks. There's a problem. It's working, but I gave them all to 1. So I'm going to change my seed again, and I think I'm 11, right? Oh, what will I be?
You're going to be 16.
Will it be 16?
Yeah.
Alright, let's try 16. Then this should be 17. This should be 18. This should be 19.
Is there a way to reset this function? Like reset?
There is a way, but we won't go into it now. It shouldn't really matter. There's something else that we can do that's better, and I will show you. We can do this. So we should be able to say, now that we have that relationship built, let's do it just for Nico, not for the rest. So Nico equals, remember when we're creating instances, just with object-oriented, we can say artist, create, Nicholas. I can actually now do, instead of artist ID, just artist, and actually pass the artist. Or I could even do artist ID because we created an artist, we know what ID is, but we don't need to know it by heart. We could just query it. So we have Nico. Nico's an artist. We can check what ID Nico has without knowing. So that might be a 20, might be a 100, might be a 1. I don't care. Nico has the ID, so I just get it from there. But this should also work. This is basically doing the same thing. So ActiveRecord is smart enough to say, I have a relationship with artists, so I'm going to find an artist ID, and I'm going to get Nico's artist ID. So it's doing that for us, basically. So let's say we don't want these ones for now. Let's leave them like that. So I need to run my seed again for that to happen. Looks like it worked. If I check now my tracks, see, it's auto-assigning 16 for us. So we knew it was 16, but now we don't really have to, because it can figure it out for us. Sweet. Rake console. Let's try that one more time with feeling. Give me your power. Boom. So now,
belongs to and has many, basically doing join tracks on artist ID equals tracks artist ID.
yeah. Or even better, in this case, it's just saying select everything from tracks where artist ID equals 16. Fact is, we don't care. Sorry? You could do anything you want. Yeah. So again, you don't care. You need to learn, and this is very important. I know you shared some videos with like 5 hours of SQL, master SQL. Fine, but the time that you're spending here now, ActiveRecord is way more powerful. And this is what we're learning. And this is what you'll be using for your project. So my recommendation to you is stop learning SQL for a while. Embrace ActiveRecord. Learn it really well. Use it for your project, and you're going to create an awesome project. And you can still learn SQL on the side later on, but your priority should now be mastering ActiveRecord. Right? This is the end game. I'm not going to show you something that's going to be better than ActiveRecord. Now, ActiveRecord is the thing. So use it. Yeah. This is the end game. This is what you want to use. Yes? So I want to create a many-to-many. What do you think could be a many-to-many? So, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to do fans. You confuse me. So let's take a quick back step through what we need to do. How do we create? First of all, what is a many-to-many relationship? It's 2 one-to-many. Okay, but so how many classes would we need to create that many-to-many relationship? We need 2 and the joint, right? So we have 1 already. So we have the artist, but what do we need now? We need the fans, and we need something to join them. I'm going to create like a fandom class. Yeah, so a fan has a fandom of like this artist. So then this is a joint class, and this creates a many-to-many between the fan and the artist. So an artist can have many fans, and a fan can support many artists. So I just said it, I need 2 new classes. In fact, I don't need 2 new classes, I need 2 new models. What's the difference? I need a class and a table to go with it. Right? So I'm going to have to create a fan class and a fans table, a fandom class and a fandoms table. Right? So let's quickly, I'm going to go very fast on this one because we're over time, but I just think it's beneficial to take a look at it. You've seen the concepts, right? So now let's learn one extra stuff. That's very noisy. So I need to create migrations. I'm going to create one, just one, and say create fans and fandoms maybe. See if that works. We have a new migration. It's empty. And I'm going to say create table fans. And I'm going to say do get that table, maybe fun name, and then I'm going to create another table, fandoms, and this is going to have, basically this needs to hold the relationship between the two things, right? So it's going to have two integers. Integer fan ID and fandom ID, or artist ID. Thank you. So it's linking the fan to the artist, right? And look, I can run both. I can create both tables in a single migration. It's fine. No, because the many-to-many, remember, the artist doesn't have any reference to the fan doesn't have any reference to the artist, and the join has both. So now I need to do what? We need to run that migration, right? Let's take a look at the schema. I love watching this evolve. Migrate. Boom. See? What are we missing? The model itself, right? So the first couple, we sort of automatically generated them, but now we need to create a couple more. So I basically just need to create fandom and fan. And it's going to look pretty much like these ones, right? Except I will put fan and fandom. Okay, let's quickly describe our relationship. Remember how many-to-many works? So, from an artist perspective, what is the relationship that an artist has with fandoms? It has many, right? And then what? Has many fans through fandoms. Remember, we need that bridge. We cannot have the fans directly. We can only have it through the fandom. So because we have the fandoms, we can now also have the fans, right? So we bridge that together. And if I look at the fan, what's the relationship now? So what's the relationships here we create? A fan has many artists, and so actually the first thing is, the requirement is we need to have many fandoms, because now we can have many artists through fandoms. Yep. And finally, a fandom belongs to a fan. So it belongs to a fan. So this is singular, right? It's like English. And it also belongs to an artist. So now let's maybe create some seed for this. So I'm going to say, I don't know. I'm tired. So we can create fans, because fans don't depend on anything, right? So, but we need to have it, before we can create a fandom, we need to have a fan and an artist. Otherwise, the fandom doesn't know what it belongs to, right? So the fandom sort of depends on the artist and the fan. We already have artists, so that's fine. So now we can create a fandom, and the fandom can be, so the fan, sorry. First, the fan name, I'm just going to call it fan1. I'm boring. Yeah, no. Yep. And finally we can say fandom. Actually, we don't need to say fandom. We can say fandom create. I'm going to create multiple like this. I don't want to store them in variables. Why did I want to store the fan in a variable? So we can refer to it later on, right? So now I'm going to create a fandom. What do we need for a fandom? Yeah. So we need the artist ID, and now we need an ID, or we could just say artist and pass the artist. So Nico is the artist, and we can say fan and pass the fan. Yeah? So you can keep going, and I can have also fan 2, 3, and 4. So we're creating that relationship. So all these fans now admire me. And we could create maybe Ollie as well here. And now we can also create some fans for Ollie. So all of these fans are also fans of Ollie, right? There's a many-to-many relationship. I have these 4 fans, and these 4 fans also have many artists that they support. So hopefully that should work. What do I need to do now? Yeah, and maybe I could add my fandom, like destroy all, fan destroy all. So every time I run my seed, I want to basically clear my tables. Track is there, right? Yeah, so I'm clearing everything. I have 4 tables. 4. I'm clearing them all. So now I can run rake db seed. Boom. Let's check it. So if I refresh, I have my fandoms. See? I don't need to specify the ID. It's finding it for me. So that's quite cool. I have my artists. I have my tracks. I have my fans. And because we told ActiveRecord about this relationship, we can now also just go into the console and we can say artist, let's say find the first one and find the fans. Or we can say fan, find the first fan, find the artist.
You also find the artist tracks now.
Sure. Artist first. So we created these relationships, and ActiveRecord is doing all the legwork for us. Right? All we had to do is now just tell ActiveRecord what the relationships are. And this is again just repeating everything we've learned so far, right? So an artist has many tracks. A track belongs to an artist, right? So we look at that artist. So an artist has many tracks, and then a track belongs to an artist. Now an artist also has more relationships now, because an artist also has many fandoms, and because it has the fandoms, it can also reach the fans. It has many fans through the fandoms. Right? So we just need to remember everything we've been learning so far, right? The first week. The fan has many fandoms, and because it has the fandoms, it can also reach the artist through the fandoms, because the fandom is connecting the two together. Right? And the fandom, because it's the joint table, it basically belongs to both. It's like being pulled apart. Great. So bit of a long journey, but it was. This is basically the end game, right? So again, learn this. You will be using this all of next week for your project, and mod 2 as well, and mod 3 as well. So from now on, this is something you will be using over and over.
So ORMs now.
This is an ORM.
Yeah, in the lectures.
Yeah.
You just focus on this now.
You can put it on your CV now. You know ORMs. Yeah. That's it. You'll get hired tomorrow. Cool. So we looked at ActiveRecord. What is ActiveRecord again? To do what? It manages the database for us, right? So it manages the connection to the database, and it also manages what? Yeah. So creating, storing, all the CRUD stuff. How does it do it?
We don't care.
We don't care. Good answer.
We basically do it.
So,
But Git style.
but what do you need to know then? What is it you do need to know? Well, you need to know that you need to create classes, right? And we also need to create a model. So the model is not just the class, but it's a class enriched by the table, right? So we have this mirror now. So we need to manage our database, and we need to manage our classes. And together they combine and they form Voltron. They form... if you know Voltron, it's a fun reference. Together they combine and they form a model, right? So the artist model is the artist class linked to the artist table. The fan model is the fan class linked to the fans table. Fandom, you know it. Yeah? What you do need to know is how to create these things. If I wanted to, remember that this is just a class, so I could even create my own custom methods as well. So if I wanted my artist to be able to greet, I could do that. If I wanted my artist to be able to write a song, I can give it a name of the song, and then all I had to do was like track, create. Artist is self, and the title is the name, whatever. That should work. So we can create our custom methods, just like before. So it's very, very powerful, right? So ActiveRecord takes care of everything we've seen yesterday. It's just happening behind the scenes for us now. We can create, we can destroy, we can read, we can do all the CRUD operations. So CRUD operations on tables happens here, as in like when we create rows. This is our models, right? And then changes to the actual database, how do we do those? Through migration. So we now have a new migration system. And this is very powerful because it's like what? What's the analogy? It's like Git. Git good. It's Git for databases, right? So we are able to save changes we make to our databases in time, which means we can retrace our steps, change stuff, go back to the future. So we can move back and forward. So every change you make from now on to the database, you will manage it yourself. You will do it through migrations. How do you create a migration? Rake, DB, create migration, and you need to give it a name with underscores. And it creates a timestamp, so it manages all the versioning for us. So it's pretty powerful. Are you ready? Yeah. So for the rest of the day, I really want you to work on this. I will share the file that you can use to basically create the boilerplate that I had. And you should start practicing on this. Like create something in your mind, like I want to create doctors and appointments and stuff. Okay, let's do it. Create a template, start creating your models, create your database, start working with that, right? So
you're not going to actually have labs for it.
You probably have, yeah, you have labs as well. But I recommend you empower yourself, and labs are good, but they're not enough. Because I think labs help you follow instructions. But at some point you need to basically leave the nest and learn to fly. To do that, you need to own every piece of character that you write in there. You need to own that. You need to have written that yourself. Because you only really get to truly understand the problems you're solving, how you're solving it, when you do it yourself without getting a template with someone already doing it for you. So the labs are great to get started, but I also recommend that you start creating your own projects. And this is true for mod 2 and 3 and 4, everywhere. Because when you get to mod 5, you need to be able to roll with it and create your stuff. So you need to be really comfortable with this. And the best way to get comfortable is do it from scratch. Right? Following tutorials never helped me. I used to, but if I'm watching videos and I'm just typing what they tell me to type, I don't really get to think that much. So it was useful to sort of see the syntax. But then you need to make that connection in your brain. And the best way to do it is just do it yourself. And you will find you struggle. You'll find that you're blocked at different points. And then you use the PEP protocol, right? So like, I'm stuck. But now you're stuck because you have a problem you created yourself. So you know what the solution should be. You just maybe don't know how to get there yet. You Google it. You ask a colleague. You ask a TCF. We're here for you. That's it. Thank you very much.